Hello, and welcome to our latest installment in our UXDX online series. I hope you're as excited as I am for the talks that we have today. But before we jump into those, I want to give a very quick introduction to UXDX and why we host these sessions. So at UXDX, our motto is that the world is full of bad software. And what I mean by that is not bad software that doesn't work, it's software that's just clunky and awkward to use. And I always jump to my banking example where I have two different banks. One is a more traditional bank, and one is one of the new digital challengers. And they're a world apart in terms of how easy they are to use, even though they technically do the same things. But I know which one I reach for and therefore do more banking with. And our mission is to help companies build an environment that can't build bad software because it's nothing to do with the people on the teams or the skill sets or anything like that. We really believe it's the processes that are the problem. And we want to help companies make sure that they can't build this bad software. And how we believe that shift will take place is moving away from waterfall projects where you lock in a scope months ahead of time and before you've even really validated it with customers to empowering autonomous product teams. Now, that's really easy to say, but incredibly difficult to do in practice because you end up changing and breaking all of the existing processes around the organization. And that's where these talks come in. So no talk is going to go through the whole process, but we ask people to share how they're improving their ways of working, or even just looking at your career and changing how you work, so that you can learn, adapt, and improve, and hopefully accelerate your career as well. So as you're listening to the talks, the speakers will leave some time for questions. So please do think about if you have any questions you'd like to ask, and you can type them on whichever platform you're watching this on, and we'll collate those and ask them to the speakers. But that's enough of me speaking. You're not here to listen to me, so I'd like to introduce our first speaker for this evening. This will be Gregor Matheson, who's Senior Design Manager, and he'll be talking about losing your job without losing your mind. So I would like to welcome Gregor to the stage. Over to you, Gregor.
Thank you very much. Good day, everybody. I felt when I titled this talk, Losing Your Job Without Losing Your Mind, it was either going to help fill a room or probably help empty one. So hopefully it isn't the latter. So thank you very much for having me. And I hope there's something of value in here for everybody. But, virtual hands up, how many people of watching today have been on the receiving end of a layoff since the 1st of January 2023? Well, you are not alone. Each emoji on this slide represents 1,000 people that have been laid off in tech since January 2023. That's over 500,000 people, close to even 1 million people if you include 2022 as well. And the number is still climbing week to week. Pretty scary when you see it like that, and pretty terrifying when you see it quantified like that, isn't it? Well, what's even scarier is that studies have shown that 77% of these individuals attribute deteriorating mental health to their layoff. 33% are more likely to get divorced within the 18 months following their layoff. 1 in 5 will likely develop an addiction, and terrifyingly, 1 in 5 are also likely to take their own life as a result of loss of employment. Now, are you not glad you came to this positive presentation? Joking aside, why am I talking about this? Well, firstly, like many people watching this, I can imagine I am part of a family that has experienced divorce, addiction, and suicide. So I've witnessed firsthand the lasting impact these events can have on an individual's life. But secondly, up until my own layoff, I considered myself to be a very resilient person. However, after my layoff, I found myself in a really unfamiliar place. Felt anxious for the first time in my life, felt worried about my livelihood, and really pessimistic about my job prospects. And it was a stark realization that even the most resilient people can fall victim to that scarcity mindset, what I call the scarcity mindset. But also, it was a realization of how easy it was for that to happen to somebody who did consider themselves to be a resilient person. But that doesn't need to be your story. I used to think this scarcity mindset kind of grew from just simply ambiguity. But what I learned through my layoff was scarcity is ambiguity and inaction. So during my layoff, to try and keep myself sane and occupied with my 3 days, I developed, kind of unbeknownst to myself, a bunch of different tools, journal prompts, exercises, frameworks, as well as obviously lean on the fantastic resources of others that are already out there to help guide me through my layoff. All of which helped me reframe the scarcity mindset into what I call an abundance mindset. And it did so by helping me develop my self awareness throughout that layoff journey, prevented me from falling into mental and physical slumps, minimizing that feeling of overwhelm, chaos, and panic, and also providing me the reassurance through intention and action. And for the record, I'm just a guy sharing his experience, hoping that it provides a value to others experiencing the same thing. I am definitely not qualified. This is not a scientific process, but all of the things I'm going to share today, I do believe helped me on my journey. So I simply wish to pay it forward to share with yourselves and anybody else going through the similar journey or something similar. I've bundled these resources into a framework called the 6 Fs because wouldn't be a speaking gig without a framework, if I'm right. And with each, I'll share some of the journal prompts, exercises, and tools that help me reframe that scarcity into an abundance mindset. So let's get started. Hearing you have lost your job feels like what I kind of compare to like cold water shock. Like your mind suddenly spins into like a state of overwhelm, millions of thoughts firing simultaneously. And what the fuck is going on is probably one of the first things that will pop into your head when you hear that dreaded news. I know it did for me. So instead of this, this feeling of scarcity, ambiguity, and panic, you need to really try and recognize when that's happening and take yourself from scarcity into abundance. What do I need right now? And it's important that you bring some calm to the storm that is happening around you. Understand where you are and understand like what you need to tune into and understand what you selfishly need right now. So what do I actually want to do right now? I can almost guarantee you it will not be job hunting. However, it can be tempting to jump into that as an instinctual reaction to learning that you no longer have one. It's like fight or flight, and it's like I've got to go and find a new job. But really, it's the last thing you should be doing. You really need to actually grieve the loss of employment, and maybe do so alongside your colleagues. It's not often you get to take advantage of all this free time and indulge yourself like this. So I found it personally helpful to really just like actually tune into like what do I actually want to be doing right now. It is not sitting at my desk thinking about work. It's actually completely disengaging from work, binging Netflix, getting fast food, whatever it may be for you, as long as it's not a destructive behavior. Who would be a great person to reach out to? Other than your colleagues, you're typically the only person in your close circle of family and friends experiencing a loss of employment at the time. And that could create a very lonely experience. I feel in situations like this, because in your circle, your family and friends, it is quite an isolating experience because now you've got all this free days when everybody is still working. Especially if you're in a remote environment like myself as well, it can be very isolating. So who would be a great person to reach out to? Who would be a great person to hear your thoughts, frustrations, and be able to vent to them, like let it all out in like a judgment-free environment? We all probably have that one person that's popped into our head, and that's the person that you should always reach out to in a time like this. And then finally, what needs to happen for me to leave this stage behind? Often when you experience difficulty in life, you hang on to thoughts and feelings and emotions, kind of unwilling to let them go, but not really knowing why. You just kind of want to like stay in the misery mud, as I call it. So actually understanding where you are in this grieving journey and what you need to do to leave that stage behind can really help counteract that feeling of overwhelm. So I use this kind of exercise. It's a typical kind of what's known as like a grieving curve, but I've kind of just adapted it slightly for a layoff versus an unfortunate loss of life. But at each week, what I would just do is just take this and just dot vote. Very simply, where do I think I am? like not giving it too much overthought or over engineering it, just kind of getting a bit of a gut check and a temperature check. And then I'd ask myself 3 questions. Why do I think I'm actually in this stage? Like I've just reacted and voted. Why do I think I'm in that stage of the process? What would need to happen for me to leave that stage in the past and forget about it? And then finally, what actions can I take this week to help me achieve number two? For help me to leave that stage in the past. And this was a really helpful exercise for me. Not only was it just a way for me to kind of check in with myself week to week, but over time, if you do this every single week, you will have tracked your progress, which really actually surprisingly gives you this feeling of accomplishment because there is a physical dot moving along this line back to normality. And it kind of helps eliminate the panic and scarcity. Naturally, loss of employment feels like a failure, which kind of goes without saying. For me, it was like my instinctual reaction to think there was some way I could have actually controlled the outcome, when in reality, that's rarely the case. So, how can you reframe that feeling of failure? It's instinctual for that scarcity mindset to creep in and place blame on yourself. Like I said, like what could I have done better? What could I have controlled? But in reality, you could think, what was I tolerating? Even in jobs that you absolutely adore, there is something you will be tolerating. That could be poor processes, poor compensation, poor work, poor people, all of the above. And by directing your negative emotions from ourselves to the tolerations, you can actually begin to feel pretty glad that you're no longer working there and begin to see the positive side of this feeling of failure. But I also learned that during a period where your ability to excel professionally has been taken out of your hands, it's a prime opportunity to excel personally. So I use the following journaling prompts to help me understand, how do I do that? So firstly, what have I actually accomplished in this role that I'm proud of? In every role, no matter how long you've been there. In my last role where I got laid off, I was only there for, less than a year. In that less than a year, there was work that I could be proud of, even if not tangible output. So capture it while it's top of mind, but also the impact that you have on other people is like the greatest currency. So reach out to your colleagues and peers for feedback and get them to write you recommendations. And again, this will help counteract that feeling of failure because you'll get to see the impact you've had on people's lives. But also getting onto the fun stuff, like how could the situation actually be a gift? Whether desired or not, the idea of not working does provide the benefit of free time. So while it might not be desired or you might not feel like it, it is a gift to have. What hobbies and interests can you now explore, which you kind of told yourself you didn't have the time to do so? And with regards to job hunting, look at it like as you've now got a competitive advantage over the other candidates. There may be candidates who are stressed in other roles, still applying for that job, trying to get out, but you've got all the time in the world to prep. You've got all the time in the world to do your research. You've got all the time in the world to craft your portfolio. So make use of that gift of time. And finally, like, how could I productively use this downtime? You really don't want to look back when you're in a new role, regardless of how good it is. You look back at potentially the months you had off and go, I wish I took advantage of that time off more. So how can this downtime actually become your most productive time? For me, like last year, I casually just began learning Italian. I managed to accelerate my learning like I would never have been able to do if I was in a full-time job. Equally, like I managed to get to the 4 or 5 DIY projects that I've been ignoring for the past couple of years because I had the time to do so. So this feeling of productivity, even if not professional productivity, will help counteract that feeling of failure. An exercise I leaned on was this: the fears, unknowns, and doubts, and hopes, aspirations, and desires. And typically we do leave many of our fears, unknowns, and doubts, and hopes, aspirations, and desires like in our heads. Like we pent them up, and we never verbalize them, never commit them to memory. And that those unrealized thoughts can almost compound when you have been laid off because you've got this additional feeling of failure because you haven't actioned them. So this exercise was introduced to me when I was laid off, and it kind of helped you like let it all out, as well as kind of come up with paths to resolution before they even occur, as well as establish positive habits. So, you go one by one and ask yourself, what is my biggest fear, my biggest unknowns, my biggest doubts? What are my biggest hopes, aspirations, and desires? And for the FUDs, as they're known, it needs a bit of a rebrand, but you can ask yourself, like, how would I overcome this? And the reason for this is a lot easier to produce a rational solution to a problem when you're not experiencing it. Yes, you're maybe in a kind of uncertain situation with your layoff, but like, what's your biggest fear, and how would you overcome that fear? Establish the solution when you're not in a feeling of overwhelm. And then for the HADs, the hopes, aspirations, and desires, like, ask yourself, like, what needs to be true for me to actually this to become a reality? And this helps you realize the productive behaviors that will lead you towards one of these successes that maybe you don't have and you need to start doing at this time, this moment of downtime. Sorry. And then finally, for each, like, write some statements of intent, mapping, like, I intend to do X behavior to get Y desired outcome. And keep this safe. This is not an exercise you just do in isolation and forget about it. This is actually something that I leaned on. And typically your fears, unknowns, and doubts tend to be a bit longer than the hopes, aspiration, and desires. But it means that you can refer back to these when and if you encounter any of them. And it means that you've created a solution to a problem at a time of focus and calm, when you're actually probably experiencing it at a time of overwhelm. And this is probably going to be the most awkward one. Money and finances. Probably impossible to talk about layoffs without talking about finances. And I am a firm believer that money cannot buy you happiness, but it can provide you access that contribute to happiness. But it also, like, as we all know, pays your bills. So it's incredibly, incredibly important and shouldn't be discounted. What the hell am I going to do for money? Is probably a statement that will inevitably run through your head when you lose your job, typically in that state of panic. But let's flip that and ask yourself, what the hell am I spending all my money on? When your finances are finite and your livelihood is challenged, you'll be surprised that when you start analyzing your spending, how much money you spend on crap that you do not need. And it's maybe an awkward one to broach, but if you are in this industry and you're at a relatively high, like IC management and above level, you're likely on a privileged salary in the UK, especially in comparison to the UK average, which is £35,000 a year, which is not a lot. And most people in our industry will perhaps be on that, although it's all dependent on location and stuff. So I know I can't really interact with anybody here, but if you were to lose your job today, how many of you could actually sustain your current lifestyle for 3 months? Typically when I've asked this question, the answer that people, when people put their hands up, they don't actually know. Not many people put their hand up. And would you be surprised if I told you that 34% of UK adults have less than £1,000 saved? £1,000 is not going to get you far. And I know not everybody here will be from the UK, but that's a relatively low figure. And I know people are probably thinking I'm stretched as it is. I can't afford to save. Well, interestingly, the UK average adult also spends £530 a year on takeout coffee. And those two statistics to me are terrifyingly conflicting, aren't they? People would rather prioritize a fleeting short-term enjoyment in the form of a coffee versus long-term financial security. People have less than £1,000 saved, but they spend over half that on coffee. This seems completely crazy. And to put it into perspective, if you take that £530 spent on coffee each year over 10 years, you will, of course, spent £5,300 on coffee, which alone sounds completely ridiculous. But if you take the same £530, invest it in the S&P 500 index, but the average return we've had over the last 10 years, you will have almost double that money from the same money that you spent. So it's not a financial lecture, but the point I'm just simply trying to make is like, you can have enough money to save. It just needs to be prioritized accordingly. And don't assume you are safe. Like, set yourself up for success, invest in your future, and be prepared. I did like a little survey at my work recently, which was just like, how many of you actually feel secure in this industry? And like, not many people do. The layoffs are rife, and you just never know what's going to happen. We live in a very unpredictable industry, so don't assume that you're safe. Make sure that you set yourself up for success, and this will serve you. When I was laid off, like, my wife and I's savings and investment literally saved us and allowed us to keep paying our mortgage while I wasn't working. But also ask yourself, what spending is contributing to my financial anxiety? Doesn't matter how much money you earn, we all have financial anxiety, and we increase our spending without even really realizing it. So it's natural to never question it when times are tight, but when times are good. But when times are tight, you need to analyze your finances. And most people can't tell you how much money they spend on coffee or how much money they spend on meals out. So it's really important you drill down into the specifics and understand, like, what is actually, this is not helping me. But also ask yourself, where and how am I living outside my means? Again, we all typically live outside our means somewhere, where, for some people it could be holidays, for some people it could be cars, tech, eating out, whatever it may be. And an easy way to detect, like, maybe where you're living outside your means, I remember reading something in a book years ago, which was, if you can't buy two of the thing at the time that you're buying one of them, you probably are living outside your means. And equally nowadays, if you find yourself like leaning on these buy now, pay later services like Klarna and ClearPay, probably is a good signal that you're living outside your means and you can't actually afford to be buying whatever it is that you're buying. But also ask yourself, like, how much happiness do I genuinely attach to these items? Once you've even determined your list of, these are my must-have spendings, this is my nice-to-have spending, go through that list again and really question, like, do I actually get a lot of happiness out of this? Because quite often the happiness that we think we get turns out to be very fleeting or unnecessary. So where do you start? Well, you need to understand your finances in order to control them. So during my layoff, I developed this expense sheet that I've got in Notion. It helps you kind of scrutinize your spending while also providing clarity on where and how you're living outside your means. But in addition to that, I've also shared the habits and tips that you can maybe use tomorrow to start building your financial nest egg and setting yourself up for future success. Like I said, I am not a qualified financial advisor or any of those disclaimers. This is just things that have served me well and helped me personally over the last like 10 years. What are my friends and family going to think is such a common thing that runs through your head when you lose your job. And the reason why, I think, is like a lot of us attach shame to losing your job, even though it's 9 times out of 10 outside of our control. We can feel embarrassed and assume that we might, those around us will be disappointed in us or even judge us. But ask yourself, like, who is always there for me? Reframe it, because surrounding yourself with those who care for you the most is the actual much needing kind of healing tonic you need when, you have lost your job and you have this intense feeling of isolation. And studies have shown that the relationships that you have with your closest are actually more as crucial to your survival as food. So it's very tempting to kind of isolate yourself during that loss of employment, but your body is actually craving the opposite. So personally, I found it helpful to reflect on your relationships and understand where and what you can do to invest in them. And apart from anything else, like, catching up with friends and family is fun and enjoyable and fantastic for your mental health, but it also gets you out the house, which is another great thing. It sounds simple, but much required during a layoff. So what relationships could you strengthen or rebuild? Life gets in the way of all relationships. Sometimes we relocate, we move jobs, we simply lose touch with people. We now have the space and time to either strengthen great relationships or rebuild neglected ones. So which ones in your life can you focus on? Another way of thinking about this is tapping into the feeling of nostalgia or just simply missing people, you know? Who have I not seen in a long time that I would love to catch up with? You know, for me, like I hadn't caught up with a friend that I've not seen in over 10 years, and I managed to catch up with them finally during my layoff. You know, we all have those people we've been meaning to catch up with, and for whatever reason, just haven't been able to make it work, but now you can. And also, how can you serve your friends and family during this time, your nearest and dearest? You know, for many of us, like work can be all consuming in our lives, especially if you feel live far away from your friends and family. But you now have the opportunity to invest in being a better partner, a better friend, a better relative without any distraction. So, what could you now have the capacity to do with those relationships that you didn't have the capacity to do before? And fitness. Unsurprisingly, when we experience a loss of employment, our mental well being takes a toll, but so does our physical well being. And the temptation to fall into that slump is just ever present, or it was for me at least. And you can often think like, how am I supposed to focus on health when don't have a job? And you know, when you don't have a job, finding a job becomes your job. So you typically neglect, your mental, emotional, and physical well-being. But flip this and ask yourself, like, what version of myself do I want to be at the end of this? You know, during a period of downtime is a fantastic time to prioritize your mental and physical well-being, get those habits, those productive habits and positive habits locked in, and create the best version of yourself so that it's all embedded by the time you do find yourself your next role. So understanding like, how am I looking after myself mentally and physically? You know, for me, like in the first 7 weeks of my unemployment, I gained 8 kilograms, which is a lot. Like that takes effort. And I just got too indulgent over the festive period without the kind of structure of a working day where I didn't have my usual routine. But it also demonstrated to me like how easy it was for that slump to happen. So like take stock, like what habits are positively contributing to my well-being and what habits are having a negative impact. You know, what activities have you always wanted to explore? Like if you're anything like me, we all have hobbies or goals, sporting challenges, spiritual journeys that you want to explore deeper, but maybe just told ourselves that we don't have the time. Now there's no excuse. Like you have nothing but time, and activities are a fantastic way to fill that time. And also, like, what could I be doing today that will improve my well-being? Self-improvement and personal development is a forever work in progress, but it starts with those baby steps, those 1% changes that you can start taking today. And that could be doing something, like I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to start doing exercise, or whatever it may be, eating healthily, something that takes effort. Or it could be not doing something, like I'm going to stop sleeping in, I'm going to reduce my alcohol content and consumption, all of that kind of stuff. And I found this is actually an exercise from James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. So I'm absolutely not taking credit. I will just encourage you to buy a copy so I don't bore you to death. But this following exercise with the journal prompts that I just shared were a really good way for me to kind of like understand like how can I prioritize my well-being and establish those productive behaviors. So write down like one good habit you wish to start and then one bad habit you wish to stop. And then for the good habits, write down how you're going to make it obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying. And for the bad habits, write down how you're going to make it invisible, unattractive, difficult, and unsatisfying. And then finally, next to each, like set intention. I'm a big fan of setting intentions and committing things to memory. So, like, how am I going to ensure success? And equally, how am I going to avoid failure? Because our fear of failure is most often a bigger desire, a bigger motivator than our desire to succeed. And last one, fear. And fear, for me, is the biggest contributor to that scarcity mindset. And I also think it's just like our instinctual reaction as human beings that the ambiguity that loss of employment kind of presents us. What if I never find a job? And this is something that crossed my mind probably more times than I care to remember during my 6-month layoff. But rather than the scarcity, how can you reframe this into what happens if I found an incredible job? You know, of course you will find a job. That is inevitable. It is highly unlikely as a skilled individual that you will never find a job. But we want to ensure that it's the right job, not the right now job. Even though this downtime may not have been planned, may not have been desired, you can still use it really effectively to understand what it is you actually want next and kind of reassess your life. You know, remember, it's still a choice. You don't have to just default to whatever you were doing before, but also you don't need to take the first thing you're offered either. And what does a fulfilling career look like for me now? You know, at least for me, like this industry, especially in the kind of turbulent times we've had these past few years, can be absolutely exhausting. So with time for reflection, like spend time to understand, like, is this what I want to be doing? Is this what fulfillment looks and feels like for me now? You know, I even considered like leaving the industry entirely in pursuit of a simpler, you know, less stressful life. I even considered doing it temporarily. I was just like, while I'm learning Italian, why don't I get a job as a waiter in an Italian restaurant so I could just like increase my Italian? It doesn't even need to be permanent. But what I'm trying to say is, could this time be the time to reinvent yourself? Like, do you want to be going back to what you were doing, or is this a time to maybe start a new business or pursue another career? Have I done everything in my power to find that new role? You know, the recruitment process in our industry is inherently broken, and it's easy to kind of like shake your fist at the industry and kind of deflect any accountability for what might happen. And it is really bad. I'm not disputing that, but equally, you don't want to look back and gone, you know, shoulda, woulda, coulda done that. You know, so understand like what are you doing with regards to your job search that is working really well for you, and what do you maybe need to pour some more energy into? And ask yourself with everything that you apply for, does this role align with my ambitions and my values? Unless you received, you know, some crazy severance package, which seems to be like, you know, unicorn these days, most of us will need to find that job as soon as possible. And that is okay. So you want to try and find something quickly, but there's no reward in just running into the arms of another miserable job. Once you're in there and the kind of the feeling of, oh yes, I've got a job. Once that wears off, you're just going to be like, why the hell did I take this job? So understand what you want, and also more importantly, try and avoid your own kind of proximity bias by like making excuses for the company that you're applying for, ignoring red flags or anything that lowers that barrier to entry. You know, unfortunately, whether consciously or subconsciously, companies will prey on your circumstances, and you just want to make sure it's the right role for you. But most importantly, you've got to operationalize your job hunt. You know, applying, excuse my French, but applying for jobs is fucking demoralizing. Like I hated every second of it. And some applications you pour your heart and soul into, some you don't, and you apply for flippantly, you get ghosted all the time. And yeah, it's terrible. It is really terrible out there at the moment. But by operationalizing your side of the fence and keeping your side of your part of the process organized, efficient, and streamlined, you'll feel better about yourself because you're like, right, I will land something. I'm doing all the right things. It's just a matter of time.
Hi, Gregor.
So
Just to jump in, sorry, we've gone a few minutes over, so if you could wrap up as quickly as possible, that'd be great.
No worries. There's only a couple of slides left anyway. So I created the following job tracker to kind of help bring order to this job search chaos. And each ticket in here has a template to kind of stay on top of all your applications, questions you should be asking, what information you provided, etc. But there's also a bunch of tips in there about how to leverage LinkedIn Premium, advice for reaching out to people, portfolio and interview advice, as well as a handful of recruiters that were personally there for me at a time of need. And just to kind of wrap up, like I've not been able to show everything today, but every resource, this presentation and more, I've collated into a Notion site. The site is 100% free and available to anybody forever. You can scan the QR code to visit it, or just bit.ly/the success, all lowercase, all of which should, you know, help you kind of reframe that scarcity mindset into that abundance mindset, or turn your should do's into must do's, and reframe that overwhelm into clarity and action. And if you do find it valuable, like I just kind of hope to get this into the hands as many people as possible, and those who need it the most. So if you do find it valuable, please just pay it forward and share it with whoever you wish. And the final thing I just want to say, if over 500,000 people in our industry have been impacted by layoffs, the chances are at least one of them. So I just want to ask each of you, whoever just popped into your head when you read that, text them or email them or reach out to them and just say, I was thinking about you today. How are you? From experience, I can guarantee that not only will it put a smile on your face, but you never know, you might have also just saved their life. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Gregor. That was really, really interesting. And judging from all the comments that we got throughout it seems like the audience really liked it as well. So thanks for your share.
Okay, it'll be on there, so hopefully I'll be able to see the comments at some point. But yeah,
if you go onto the LinkedIn, you'll be able to scroll through them. There's some people saying love the operationalize. People are talking about their frugal lifestyle is helping them. Coffee is the new avocado toast. So
awesome. Good to hear. Thank you, everybody.
And unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, but thanks once again.
That's fine. Don't worry. If anybody does have questions, just DM me on LinkedIn. I'm not shy. So on you go.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. So we'll move on to our second speaker of this evening, which is Meghan Logan, who's a staff product designer at Thrivent. And Meghan will be talking about leveraging neurodivergent traits for design strategy. So I would like to welcome Meghan to the stage. Over to you, Meghan.
Cool, thanks. Hey, everybody. By the way, Gregor, that was me that made the avocado toast comment. So hi, I'm Meghan. I am a staff product designer. I have about a decade of experience. I currently work at Thrivent, but over the years, I've been involved in a couple cool projects across tech. I've worked on data protection and legal compliance at Lever. I have worked on account security at Twilio. I've created machine learning tools at Amplitude. I've also worked across different service design aspects like simplifying purchasing a mortgage online at Credible and more. Today, I'm going to be talking about harnessing our neurodivergent superpowers with the GRIT framework. If you were here earlier for Gregor's talk, he said it wouldn't be a talk without a framework. And so I'm really grateful that I turned mine into a framework. But I'm going to start with a little bit about myself first. So my journey into design was very untraditional. So started about 10 years ago, and I got involved in design after I heard a coworker talking about UX UI. I had always been somebody that enjoyed being a generalist, whether it was operations, I did marketing, I did tech writing, I even went to school for animation, and nothing really satiated my craving for excitement in the workplace. So I've always been the type who loves to explore all these different topics. I've bounced around between new ideas. I just like to keep things really interesting. And so it's not the stereotypical way that you imagine when people talk about ADHD, because I as much as I love being a generalist, I've really been able to hone that in and find my specialty. And I really feel like I had found my home with design. It was the perfect mix between psychology, art, psychiatry, problem solving, all rolled into one. So when I stumbled upon UX, it felt like a match made in heaven. But in 2021, I was diagnosed with ADHD and I almost quit design forever. But first, I would like to encourage a moment of thought. When you hear the term ADHD, what comes to mind? I know I can't interact with you in the chat, but feel free to add your thoughts. More often than not, people picture the hyperactive traits. It's the friend that can't pay attention, the person that gets bored easily and can't sit still long, or maybe you heard ADHD and you only heard one thing, squirrel. The reality is most people's understanding of ADHD tends to focus on the negatives. So imagine this. You are about to go under anesthesia for brain surgery, and you're casually chatting with your doctor beforehand. but just before you drift off, your doctor mentions that he has ADHD. How would you feel? Would you worry that he might lose focus or get distracted mid-surgery? Would you wonder if he could forget something important? It's a pretty extreme example, sure, but it highlights a real issue. The fact that ADHD is often seen only through its challenges, and that's the perspective that most people are familiar with. In today's fast evolving tech landscape, innovation and creativity are paramount. But many neurodivergent designers struggle with the stigma and the misunderstanding around ADHD. This prevents them from fully harnessing their strengths. So according to Tech Talent Charter's 2024 Diversity in Tech Report, only 3% of tech employees are identified as neurodivergent by their employers. I did not believe this number when I first read it. However, the rest of the report continues to say that a direct survey of employees found that 53% of respondents identify as having a neurodivergent condition, with ADHD being one of the most prevalent conditions. So out of this 53%, 15% was ADHD. So I'd like to share a little bit about my journey with ADHD, which is really the thing that led me to creating this talk and this framework. So in 2020, I was interviewing at a company called Amplitude. I didn't really feel hopeful that I would get the job. At the time, I had only worked at smaller startups. Some of them were toxic work environments. I was designer of one. There wasn't really a team to learn from. So I didn't really feel good enough to work there. And the entire time I was interviewing, I had this cloud of self-doubt looming over my head. Even though I had the relevant experience, I really struggled with imposter syndrome at the time. But I did get the job. And before this, I hadn't had the opportunity to work with a team of designers. I loved the product. I loved the people. I loved the culture. The person that had been interviewing me at the time was somebody I really looked up to, and she had worked in some industries that I was interested in growing my career in. So it really just felt like a gift from someone from somewhere that I got the opportunity to be here and landed the job. I felt like I had made it, and I was working somewhere that gave me more credibility as a designer. So being self-taught, even if it sounds pretty dramatic, there was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to get here. Maybe not as much blood, but definitely a lot of tears and a lot of sweat. So when COVID hit, everything changed. Being confined for so long stripped away any excuses for things like procrastination, forgetfulness, or mental fog. It pushed me to confront what had always felt like internal roadblocks. I often felt a step behind, and I would forget things super easily. Summarizing key takeaways from our customer calls became very difficult. I felt like it was a constant uphill battle just to remember what I had done throughout the workday. So it might have seemed like I wasn't paying attention, but the truth is I was listening intently to every word in every meeting. In fact, I was so focused on staying focused. I think the only thing I would hear in my mind sometimes in meetings was me telling myself to pay attention. So of course I missed all the content happening within. But by November of 2020, I had been struggling in my role for quite some time. I confided in my interim manager in every weekly that we had. I was very honest about my struggles and what I was going through. I had expressed confusion over my declining cognitive abilities. And at one point, I had even joked that maybe I had a brain tumor. In December of 2020, I had my annual performance review. I met expectations, but I had areas that I needed to improve in order to earn back the trust that I had lost. So I wasn't thrown off by the review. I knew that there would be areas to work on, and I figured eventually I would have to face the consequences of my struggle. So the words you're seeing on the screen right now, this is actually what my new manager said to me as I was being fired. So upon the arrival of our new design manager, I faced a really harsh reality in our one-on-one meeting that we had. It was her first official day as my manager. She fired me. So as she said this and she was delivering the news, obviously her words cut really deep and I was crushed. Every ounce of imposter syndrome hit me all at once. It was just like that feeling when your mom tells you to bring a jacket because you're going to be cold, but you insist that you will not be cold and you don't need a jacket, but you in fact do get cold and need that jacket. I mourned the excitement and the love that I had for the company, the relationships I built. I felt as if my original feelings of self-doubt reared its ugly head around just to remind me that I was not good enough. And now someone who is supposed to be a leader and a guide to me was telling me that I should give up. I felt like I had failed. And at the same time, I couldn't really shake the feeling that it wasn't 100% my fault. For a while, I nearly drowned in all that self-doubt. I felt inadequate. I felt haunted by my lack of a formal degree, but I was really determined to understand what was happening to me and how I had gotten here. So after an 18-month journey of doctor visits and some self-reflection, I finally received an answer, and that is when I got my ADHD diagnosis. So all the negatives of my experience molded really into one key takeaway, and that was if I didn't understand myself, I couldn't help myself. And when I look back on that experience, I didn't understand what was happening to my brain, to my body, to my emotions, to my reactions. And getting a later in life diagnosis, it led to a mountain of grief. I grieved my past self. I grieved the potential that I hadn't reached, all the things maybe I could have accomplished by now if I hadn't spent years thinking I was just lazy or stupid or didn't have enough self-control. So being here today with what I now know and what this journey has taught me is that embracing my neurodivergence has actually empowered me to gain clarity about my needs, my strengths, and my approach to design. I believe we can harness the power of neurodiverse traits, transforming the parts of ourselves that we were made to feel ashamed of and turn those into our own unique superpowers. And that is what this is all about. This talk aims to empower neurodivergent designers, build safety around communicating their needs in the workplace, and help teams and organizations recognize the value of diverse thinking in the creative process. So let's dive into how we can turn our differences into powerful drivers of innovation and resilience in design. So this is that framework I mentioned earlier. The highs and lows of my personal journey inspired what I call the GRIT framework. It's a structured approach I put together that empowers neurodivergent designers and their teams. I really wanted a way for others to navigate the challenges that come with our diagnosis and, more importantly, to uncover the unique strengths within it. GRIT is about recognizing, celebrating, and harnessing our abilities rather than being defined by our differences. And yes, I use ChatGPT to help me form a cool acronym for it. By applying these principles in my work, I've been able to empower both myself and others to embrace, understand, and harness their neurodivergent traits, reshaping their perspective from something negative to something that can drive innovation and equity in design. When we understand ourselves and help others understand our needs, we create a foundation for more equitable design practices and embrace diversity in thinking and problem solving. And most importantly, we remove the shame and the stigma that may come alongside our struggles. So each letter represents a different building block for professional and personal growth. G is for gaining clarity on your needs. This is really about understanding your unique working style and removing the shame associated with neurodivergence. So that's just understanding your expectations, limitations, looking within. R is for relaying your needs to others, learn how to communicate effectively with teams and leaders to advocate for the environment and the resources that you need to thrive. I is for identifying your superpowers and reframing neurodivergent traits as the strengths that can contribute to creative problem solving, faster iteration, and innovative design thinking. And lastly, T is for tune and grow, continuously refining your processes and communication skills, using the feedback you get to improve your design approach over time. So GRIT has helped me identify, build, and reframe. So I've identified my needs, I've set boundaries, and I've created a work environment where I could thrive. I've built stronger work relationships, I avoid misunderstandings and foster trust. And lastly, I've been able to reframe my thought patterns, refocus my energy, and refine my skills. So digging into the framework, G for gaining clarity, it's really about knowing what makes you tick or what ticks you off. But the first step towards thriving at work is understanding ourselves. Without the self-awareness, feeling lost or frustrated, or like you're constantly falling short is too easy. Gaining clarity helps you set the stage for success by identifying your unique needs and setting boundaries that keep you feeling in control. So the first step is meeting yourself where you are by understanding your current limitations and expectations. So identify any challenges or limitations you currently have, whether that's in your personal life or within your role. When you understand what holds you back, you can develop strategies to work around or overcome those obstacles, whether they're challenges within your role, personal limitations, or feedback that you've consistently received, but you've struggled to apply effectively. Make sure you understand the expectations tied to your role as well. It's important to understand what's expected of you at work so you can show up as your best self within that role. And additionally, you can utilize what your limitations are to help you pinpoint where there might be gaps in the expectations of your role. So the second step is also understanding and documenting 3 key areas through reflection. That's your absolute requirements, communication preferences and shortcomings, and then your strengths. So absolute requirements, these are the things that I think of as what you absolutely need to get your best work done. These are the things that would hinder you or get in the way, or additionally, it's important for you to identify and understand the things that might demotivate you. So once you become distracted by environmental or cultural roadblocks within the workplace, it continues to buzz in our minds until they're resolved. It takes up a lot of the space that we need to be efficient and focused, especially if you have ADHD. Demotivators will be the quickest path to dopamine death, making it even more difficult for you to focus or complete tasks as you are seeking that dopamine. So this can also go deeper than distractions. It's also the things that you feel can create or foster toxic work environments. So micromanagers or distrustful teammates. I personally need trust and autonomy within my workplace, and it's a non-negotiable for me personally. If I pick up on a potential manager that is maybe disrespectful or micromanagey. Sorry, I don't even know if that's a real word, but okay, the second is communication preferences. So ask yourself what type of communication works versus what does not work for you. Be aware of your communication shortcomings as well. So it's important to be honest with ourselves where we struggle when we communicate. So I'm somebody that speaks very straightforward. So oftentimes it can seem like I'm really certain of an answer, when in reality, I'm actually open to and actively seeking feedback and discussions. It's not as simple as reading books or attending a webinar on communication either. I think that some neurodivergent traits, they're part of us. And I found that that's something that leaders don't always accept. I've been denied promotions in my past on more than one occasion due to my communication style. I think that communication and leadership is something that can be pinholed into one specific fit. And for anybody that has watched Love is Blind, I would say I'm also a direct speaker, but not in the same way that Hannah is mentioning that she is a direct speaker. More so, I can just be flat, straightforward when I'm talking to people. So if companies don't naturally create that space for us to be seen or understood, we sometimes have to create that space for ourselves in order to create equitable team dynamics. Communication's probably the most important piece here. I do find that this causes the most misunderstanding at work. Some other common communication struggles for neurodivergent folks can look like honesty. So for many autistic people, the highest priority in a conversation is communicating facts, which at times can be a little off-putting to coworkers. And then conversation efficiency. Small talk is a preference, and many people might enjoy participating in small talk to avoid awkward silences, but neurodivergent individuals might prefer to skip past that. And then 3 is just strengths and weaknesses. Identify what you love doing most and where you add the most value. This is the area that you're the most confident in. Own your strengths and understand your weaknesses. Our strengths are what can be translated into more tangible design superpowers that our product partners recognize. So everything I just mentioned makes up a work preference. For some reason, work culture has made us believe or feel that we can't have our own preferences regarding work style. But when you understand how you work and what environments that you will and will not succeed in, you can communicate that back to your colleagues to set those expectations. Some examples of work preferences: I prefer to take meetings after 9:30 a.m. I need quiet work environments to focus, or please don't book over my lunch or focus time hours unless absolutely necessary. So I used to push myself to say yes to early morning meetings in order to accommodate everyone's schedule. You can think pre 9 a.m. I thought that saying yes would make a better impression than asking for a different time, but unfortunately, it's really difficult for me to fall asleep. I can't just shut my brain off when it's time for bed. So this led to me being late for meetings often or asking for last minute reschedules, and it really damaged my reputation and team trust. So I had to be honest with myself and in turn, honest with my colleagues. I ended up sharing my meeting time preferences moving forward, and I found that my colleagues were actually incredibly understanding and accommodating. So I was honest about my struggle, and they luckily met me in the middle. R is for relaying your needs comfortably and constructively to others. So no one's a mind reader. Sharing your needs with your team or boss helps them understand how to best support you. If you keep things bottled up, you're going to risk misunderstandings, burnout, and missed opportunities. Revealing your needs builds trust. It fosters better working environments, relationships, and it creates a safer environment for you where you feel like you can really shine and be yourself. I use something called the Manual of Me. So the Manual of Me is an ideal tool or guide that helps you communicate more with your colleagues and managers. It provides specific needs-based statements such as preferred work hours, directness in feedback, or the need for a quiet environment, maybe even your favorite foods. But using this removed a lot of the pressure I personally felt when communicating needs to managers or colleagues. So before I implemented something like this at work, I was never really sure when to bring things up. I think I felt a lot of shame around my needs. I was scared that it'd be interpreted as something that I wasn't good at. And in turn, it would make them see me as less competent or less capable. So having the structure within the manual really helped me communicate the parts of myself that felt very scary and vulnerable in a way that felt safe for me. So this is an example of a manual of me. There's a lot of templates available online. There's a lot of different ways to format these. But the one that I use is from manualof.me, and it's by Matthew Knight. He's the creator of the Manual of Me platform. And this just helps you tailor your needs to your work style and create the best chance of success with your team and your role, and allows you to take control over your narrative and perception through that visibility and communication. So some examples of things you can include in your Manual of Me, I have on the screen here. You'll convince me to get on board by the environment in which I thrive is, or my communication preferences are, and many more. It's a great way to get ahead of any potential misunderstandings so that if they occur in the future, your colleagues can understand your behavior and your intention. So my Manual of Me includes details about my personality profile, my needs, communication styles, how to motivate me, how to give feedback. I've always felt a little bit misunderstood at the majority of my jobs. I was never underperforming, and I wasn't really doing anything wrong, but I was getting consistent feedback on my communication style, which at the time I thought was pretty good. Here's an example from mine where I let my colleagues know if I ask a lot of questions about a decision you made or something you built, that usually means I am not fully understanding. It's important to understand everyone's processes and perspectives so that I can understand them in a way that works with my way of thinking, and it is not to challenge anybody. I've received feedback in the past that colleagues took my curiosity as questioning their decisions, and it created a lot of unnecessary tension. Instead of colleagues approaching me to understand my intentions, they assigned intention based on my unintentional impact. I found the more transparent I was, the more empowered I felt within my role. So shortly after I implemented, I started to see more success within my approaches and my methods. Additionally, my transparency created space for my coworkers to feel comfortable asking questions once they were able to understand and trust my intentions. The I is all about superpowers. So this is where you take a look at the unique strengths that come with being neurodivergent, which is your superpowers. And you figure out how to make the most of them. So it's not just about knowing what you're good at, it's about refining and using those skills to shine even brighter in your work. I know superpowers can sound corny, but they're true. And as designers, we're already equipped with some pretty incredible traits that our peers don't have. And no, it is not about being better, it's about highlighting how we are different. Celebrating our differences is critical when we have found ourselves in a world of competition. If you think about it, when you log into social media, you watch endless stories through the lens of somebody else's life. Vacation, bars, parties, events, it's easy to feel like you're somehow behind. When you log into LinkedIn, I don't have to explain that one. At work, we compete, mostly not by our own choice, but we're graded. So these are performance reviews, promotions, raises, etc. When applying for jobs, we compete with the talent pool. And when dating, we compete with every other human being in the world. It's an exaggeration, but it definitely feels like that. So tapping into your superpower not only helps you bring your best self to work, but it allows you to create the conditions for people around you to thrive. Knowing yourself and how you relate to others is key to building strong relationships, great teams, and thriving organizations, as said by IDEO. Here's two examples of what I would call neurodivergent superpowers, race car thoughts and hyperfocus. So race car thinking describes the concept of the speed of one's ability to think and process information. So the upsides of race car brain and ADHD folks can sometimes be described as accelerates at processing information and understanding concepts, incredibly quick, great at problem solving, excels at systems thinking and simplifying complex concepts. But of course, with all the good things comes bad. The power of speed translated to design can be incredible when workshopping ideas and outcomes, generating solutions, suggesting features or product ideas, hypothesizing outcomes, and more. If race car thinking is your superpower, consider implementing workshop techniques like Crazy Eights, How Might We, and other ideation templates into your workflows. And there are plenty of free assets available on Miro and FigJam that offer like the Crazy Eights and the other templates. The second is hyperfocus. So this is one of the superpowers that I find myself using most because of my natural love for design. My dopamine's already pumping when I'm working my 9 to 5. So this makes it really easy for me to hyperfocus on my tasks and produce high quality work in a short amount of time. For some, there's a range of focus when trying to get work done. It can jump between splintered, where you may be distracted and fighting yourself on the work that you need to do, or hyper-focused, where you can zero in intensely on an exciting project for hours. So some benefits in design workflows can be things like increased productivity, enhanced memory retention, higher motivation and engagement, enhanced learning, and a lot more. Keep in mind, though, that pitching the idea of 10 different paths to solve a problem will not give you credibility. So the secret to harnessing the superpower is boiling the problem down to its core goal and desired outcome so you can directly connect to your out-of-the-box proposals and how you see that impacting the overall business outcome. Powers only become super when you understand how to utilize them. So before I learned how to tune my superpowers, I often found myself deeply absorbed in projects that just weren't my priority. I would pick whatever felt best, whatever I was most excited about, whatever seemed the coolest, and I wasn't actually prioritizing based on the needs of the team and what needed to be delivered first. So over time, when stakeholders would see what I was working on and they saw that I wasn't prioritizing what I should be prioritizing, it did have a negative impact on my working relationship, and it unintentionally pushed me further away from career advancement. So with great power comes great responsibility, which I always thought was some famous philosopher that said that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess it's from Spider-Man. So firing off tons of ideas without follow-up won't return results. Hyper-focusing on work that's not priority will get you in trouble. So be sure to prioritize based on deadlines and project needs. And thinking outside the box without awareness of what's too far out of the box will come across as more unhelpful than productive. So while all of these things can be translated into superpowers, they have their additional pitfalls, which is why spending a lot of time on the G and the R is essential. You need to understand yourself, your limitations, and your expectations so you can shape that superpower. And then last, it's the T, which is all about tuning and growing your superpowers, shaping your growth, and enhancing your outputs. So as you really start to understand your neurodivergent superpowers, you will see how they set you apart in the best way possible. Whether it's your unique way of solving problems or how you see connections others might miss, these strengths are what make your work stand out. And over time, as you refine your processes and you sharpen your communication skills, you'll notice that feedback helps shape those superpowers even further. So tuning is an ongoing process of adapting, learning, and refining your approach. Tuning encourages self-reflection and growth through feedback. Tuning includes translating to product and design, mapping your superpowers to design skills, and creating your superpower statements. Growth is all about the feedback you receive over time and what you do to continually shape and refine your superpowers. The result? Your design and product output will only get stronger, more thoughtful, creative, and impactful because you're learning how to harness what makes you you in the best way possible. So as we near the end of the presentation, I wanted to include a note on creating inclusive design spaces. Diverse thinking leads to richer, more equitable, and innovative design outcomes. The path to creating those spaces includes opening ourselves up to new ways of working. I find that it can feel scary to some people because we've become so comfortable with the way that it's always been. Influencing the behavior change needed to adopt new practices may be a challenge, but I truly believe our industry will be better for it. I've included a few actionable tips for leaders and teams on creating an environment where neurodivergent designers can thrive, and provide the full list of tips upon request if you'd like them. So 2 suggestions. One I've already mentioned, that's implementing the manual of me. So when you encourage your team members to create a doc or a manual of me, it actually normalizes open conversations around individual needs, and it helps leaders better support team members in a tailored way. The second is just integrating neurodiverse perspectives into design reviews and brainstorms. So encourage new ways of working within brainstorms or design crits, like allowing time for quiet reflection and solo ideation before group sharing, or async options for feedback. Allow designers who prefer written communication time to reflect and contribute their thoughts. In addition, using structured formats like mind mapping or round robin idea sharing ensures every voice is heard, especially those who may not be comfortable speaking up spontaneously. These methods foster a culture of diverse thinking and can lead to more innovative and inclusive design solutions. In summary, embrace your self-awareness, gain clarity on your strengths, needs, and triggers. It's the foundation for growth and success. Self-awareness enables you to set boundaries and plan strategies around your unique needs. Be sure to communicate your needs effectively in order to foster trust, strengthen relationships, and help your team support you in the ways that maximize your potential. Understand, harness, and refine neurodivergent strengths to utilize as a powerful asset. that helps you drive innovation, creativity, and resilience in design. Turn your challenges into superpowers and reframe what might feel like obstacles as unique strengths that fuel your creativity and problem-solving abilities. And use the GRIT framework as a roadmap to unlock personal and professional potential. It can help you move through challenges with a structured approach to success. Embracing diverse perspectives, including neurodivergent ones, leads to stronger, more inclusive design outcomes. And with that, I will leave you with this. Be sure to embrace your own unique strengths, and if you are leading others, make sure to create space for neurodivergent team members to shine. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Meghan. That was a really kind of personal and really inspiring kind of journey that you took us on through there. So thank you very much. And we've had a lot of great comments as well. But people saying that you're much nicer than Hannah, that it was Spider-Man's uncle, who's a great philosopher.
Yeah, Uncle Ben.
Yeah. We are unfortunately out of time. But yeah, for me personally, the 3%, few people commented on it. It did seem low, and then you got us with the 53, which kind of feels a lot more accurate based on my personal experience and friends I know and things like that. So thanks for sharing. And if anybody has any questions, we're getting a lot of thank yous coming in now. I guess they can reach out to you directly.
Yep, absolutely.
Perfect. Well, that brings us to an end for today. So just want to thank you once again, Meghan, for sharing, and for Gregor earlier as well. And to everybody out there, if you found this interesting, we do have a main conference that we run in New York from the 12th to the 14th of May. There'll be 25 speakers, 2 days, plus workshops. But for our European kind of colleagues as well, we have one in Berlin from the 19th to the 21st of May. So if you like the idea of what we're trying to achieve, which is to get product, UX, design, and dev into a room together to figure out how to work better together, please do consider joining us. And if not, I look forward to seeing you at the next UXDX Online. Thank you very much.